I used to keep my phone on silent at night, like most people do, but I always set an alarm for work. No big deal. One evening, however, I forgot to switch it to silent mode. That was the night I got my first call at exactly 3:07 a.m. I remember waking up, disoriented, to the shrill ring and squinting at the bright glare of the screen. It displayed an unknown number and no caller ID. I assumed it was the wrong number, so I ignored it. But as soon as I let it go to voicemail, it rang again. Same number, same time down to the second, 3:07. I picked up, voice rasping with sleep, ready to ask whoever it was to call back at a normal hour. Instead, I heard crackling static. Then, as if far away, came the faint sound of someone whispering my name. My heart pounded so hard I couldn't manage a reply. I ended the call, my hand shaking. The phone remained still. No follow-up messages, no further rings. I tried to convince myself it was just a dream, except the notification remained in my call log when morning came. For the next few days, everything seemed normal. Work was dull, my co-workers were as friendly as ever, and I met up with some friends for a weekend hangout. I almost forgot about the strange phone call. That is, until it happened again, exactly 1 week later. This time, I jolted awake with that same sense of dread. The phone read 3:07 a.m., unknown number. The ring cut through the silence like a blade. I glanced around my bedroom, noticing the streetlight glow against the curtains. My pulse raced. I told myself it was just a prank, yet a chill snaked up my spine. Despite my fear, I answered, my voice a near whisper. Hello? Static again. Louder this time, hissing like a wind in a microphone. Then a voice, so distorted it sounded mechanical but still somehow human. It kept repeating one word. Soon, soon, soon. I tried to speak, but words caught in my throat. After about 10 seconds, the line disconnected, leaving me shaken. The day after, I switched carriers, assuming that maybe my number was compromised or a spam caller had locked onto my data. For the rest of the week, I slept in peace. No calls, no weird texts. I started to think maybe I'd overreacted. But on the next Sunday night, technically Monday morning, my phone rang at 3:07 a.m. I answered, my heart pounding with dread. The static felt more aggressive, as if electricity were crackling directly in my ear. This time, the voice managed a single phrase. It's almost time. I went straight to the phone store the next morning, explaining that I was receiving strange, anonymous calls at an odd hour. They took my phone to run a diagnostic. Supposedly everything was fine. My software was up to date, and the hardware was functional. The store staff assured me they changed my number but offered no further help. I felt uneasy, but I left, hoping the problem was solved for good. That night, I turned my phone off and put it in a drawer. A storm raged outside, thunder shaking the windows. Around 3 a.m., the storm woke me. Lightning illuminated my bedroom, and in a flash, I thought I saw something glimmer near my nightstand. Figuring it was just nerves, I tried to fall back asleep. At 3:07 exactly, a muffled ringing sound came from the drawer. My phone was powering on by itself. Light leaked through the cracks. I sat up in bed, dread pressing down on my chest. It kept ringing until I finally reached over, unlocked the drawer, and answered with shaking fingers. Hello? I whispered again, not sure why I even bothered. No static this time. Just silence. I strained to hear anything. Then, with piercing clarity, a voice uttered, "Do you remember?" A memory flashed through my mind. A few months earlier, I'd witnessed a traffic accident on a nearby street, but I wasn't sure how this call could be connected to that. Before I could respond, the call ended, leaving me trembling in the darkness. The next evening, I browsed through my call history, hoping to find some clues. My call log displayed multiple unknown entries, all at 3:07 a.m. The durations varied, 6 seconds, 10 seconds, sometimes longer. I clicked on one of them and noticed a recording option. Out of morbid curiosity, I played it back. At first it was just static, but eventually my name surfaced in the distortion. Static, your name, static, soon. My skin prickled. I had never heard anything so ominous in my life. It felt like the call was not just random, it was personal. To calm my nerves, I tried a digital cleanse. I erased old messages, cleared out photos, and even backed up and wiped the phone entirely. I set my phone's time zone manually, changing it so that 3:07 would effectively become a different time in my device's clock. It was a desperate attempt, but I hoped it would at least derail whatever was happening. That night, I sat awake, eyes shifting between the clock on the wall and my phone on the desk. My phone read 2:55 a.m., while the wall clock read 3:04. There was a slight offset, just enough to bring me some comfort. But at 3:07, according to the wall clock, my phone still started ringing. This time the screen was flickering, and the phone had set itself to the correct time zone, even though I had locked that setting to prevent automatic updates. I stared, heart thudding, as the device vibrated in short, tense bursts. It felt like the phone was pulsing with a life of its own. I was so terrified that I let it ring, over and over, until it finally stopped on its own. The following morning, I discovered that my phone had taken several photos during the night. They were all black squares at first glance, but when I adjusted the brightness, they showed corners of my bedroom. One image caught my breath in my throat. There was a hazy figure standing at the foot of my bed. I could faintly see a silhouette, not quite human, leaning forward as if observing me in my sleep. I nearly dropped my phone. I scanned through the rest of my photo gallery, finding dozens of these dark, eerie images, each snapped at 3:07 a.m. on different nights. Some showed my reflection in the window, but the reflection in the phone's camera was different. My face appeared blurred, elongated, as if I was screaming in slow motion. In another photo, a pair of faint lights hovered behind me, almost like eyes. Driven by fear, I told a close friend what was happening. He suggested we stay up together one night, with him on a video call, to document what went on at 3:07. We agreed on a Friday when he didn't have work early the next morning. The night started uneventfully. We talked about random things to pass the time. Then, as if on cue, my phone began to buzz right at 3:07. My friend watched from his end, eyes wide. I mustered the courage to answer on speaker. Static blasted, making my friend wince. Then a new voice, deeper and sharper than before, cut through. It said, "You saw it, didn't you?" I knew it was referring to the photos, though I couldn't figure out how that was possible. The call ended abruptly, and for a moment, neither of us could speak. My friend looked genuinely unsettled, and I couldn't blame him. The next day, he offered to let me stay at his place for a while. Maybe changing the location would help, we reasoned. So that night, I stayed over in his guest room. We kept my phone in the living room, turned off, and wrapped in aluminum foil, an outlandish step. But we were desperate. Despite our precautions, we heard it ring again around 3:07. Somehow the phone turned on by itself. Alarmed, we raced to the living room to see the phone's screen lighting up through the foil. I unwrapped it, and against my better judgment, answered. No static this time, no whispering voice. Instead, I heard an odd hum, like an engine revving in the distance. Then a woman's voice, calm, almost gentle. "Tomorrow," she said. "Look outside." My friend and I exchanged nervous glances. We spent the rest of the night too wired to sleep. The next morning, we looked outside his window at the exact time the call had indicated, though no specific time had been given. We just assumed we'd know tomorrow morning. Nothing seemed unusual for a while, just neighbors leaving for work. Then, around mid-morning, there was a sudden power surge on the block. Lights flickered, and a transformer down the street emitted sparks. No one was injured, but it was still unsettling. We couldn't be certain that the phone call had predicted the event. It might have been a coincidence, but by now, coincidences felt unlikely. Back home, I searched online for anyone who'd experienced something similar. I found obscure message boards discussing haunted phone calls, bizarre voicemails, and other unexplained phenomena. None of them fully matched my situation, though. Some people suggested tossing the phone into a river or burying it. Others said I should smash it. I tried to follow that advice one night. I ventured to a nearby lake and tossed the phone in, watching it sink beneath the surface. The sense of relief was overwhelming. Finally, I could reclaim my sanity, I thought. That same night, I used an old phone for my alarm, with no SIM card and no connection to anything. I drifted off to sleep, more at ease than I had felt in weeks, until I heard an all-too-familiar ringing at 3:07 a.m. Confused, I scrambled in the dark and grabbed the old phone. Its screen was lit up with an unknown caller. Impossible. It had no service, no data plan, nothing. Yet it rang with the same unknown number. Shaken, I answered. All I heard was breathing, heavy and deliberate, as if whoever was on the other end was right next to me. Softly, a voice said, "You can't ignore this." The next morning, the old phone displayed new photos in the gallery, dark, grainy images of the lake, presumably from earlier that evening. One showed the spot where I had thrown my original phone. In another, I could see my reflection in the water, but something stood behind me, a tall, shadowy shape with distorted limbs. At this point, my life began to unravel. I slept fitfully, anxious for that nightly call. I was afraid to leave my home, yet being inside felt just as unsettling. Every day I sat by my computer, refreshing those obscure forums, hoping someone had a solution. Nothing felt solid or real anymore. One user finally responded to my plea, suggesting that the calls indicated a sort of attachment that was feeding off my fear. The solution, they said, was not to destroy the phone but to confront it. Answer the call, say I acknowledged its presence, and refused to allow it any power over me. It sounded strange, but I was desperate. That night I braced myself. At 3:07 the phone lit up. I answered calmly. "I know you're there," I said aloud. "You can't scare me anymore." My heart thundered in my chest, but I pressed on. "I'm not running." Static rose, almost deafening. In the crackle, I heard a swirl of voices overlapping. The words were incomprehensible, but the feeling was cold and heavy. Finally, one voice separated from the others and whispered, "It's too late." A final burst of static ended the call. The phone screen went dark. I stared at it, adrenaline surging through my body. When morning arrived, I felt strangely peaceful. My phone's battery was drained to zero, and for the first time, I didn't rush to charge it. I left it there until later that afternoon, deciding maybe I had put an end to whatever haunted me. For a while, things were calm. No calls, no strange images, no sense of being followed. The weight that had been pressing on me began to lift. I managed to sleep through the night without waking up. A new sense of hope filled me, however cautious it might have been. Then, one evening, nearly 2 weeks after that final call, I found a note taped to my front door. It had just 2 words scrawled in uneven letters. 3:07 tonight. My stomach dropped. I tried to convince myself it was a prank, maybe a bored neighbor or a friend with a twisted sense of humor. But at 3:07 a.m., my phone, still the old backup, rang once more. This time, there was no static at all. The line was almost too clear, as if whoever was on the other end stood in the same room. A voice spoke with an unsettling calm. I never left. My breath caught in my throat. I felt a chill spread across my body as every hair stood on end. A faint rush of wind seemed to pass through the room as though something brushed behind me. But when I turned around, there was nothing there. The call ended without any further explanation. I was left alone in the silent house, phone in hand, the screen returning to black. It was then that I realized the horrifying truth. Whatever this was, whoever this was, They had always been one step ahead of me. Tossing phones, changing numbers, or even defying the device's settings didn't matter. There was no escaping it. After that night, I stopped trying to run. I keep my phone off as often as I can, but it doesn't seem to matter. If 3:07 a.m. comes around and it wants to ring, it will. Sometimes I answer. Sometimes I don't. Either way, I sense it around me. A presence beyond logic. A call that exists outside the rules of technology or reason. I can't explain it fully, and I don't know why it chose me. But I do know that each time I pick up that phone, the voice sounds clearer, sharper, as if it's drawing closer. If you ever find yourself awake at 3:07 a.m. and your phone starts ringing, do yourself a favor. Think carefully before you answer. You might just invite something into your life that never truly goes away.